let's go ahead and end our discussion of the persuasive speech with an analysis of a sample speech. And as we've done previously, I think it would be beneficial if you had a copy of the persuasive speech evaluation rubric available. And as you watch the speech, just be thinking in terms of where you would put the speaker along these various scales. Go ahead and take a look at it, and then afterwards we will analyze it together.
Today I'd like to talk to you about NASA's federal funding, or rather lack thereof. But before I begin, I'd like to start with a quote that I think is particularly illustrative of the monumental strides that we've made as a society over the past half century or so. And it goes as follows. To place a man in a multi-stage rocket, project him into the gravitational field of the moon, where passengers may make scientific observations, perhaps land alive. All that constitutes a wild dream worthy of Jules Verne, and I, for one, am bold enough to say that such a voyage will never take place, regardless of all future advances. Now, Lee DeForest, an American radio pioneer and inventor of the vacuum tube, said these words in 1957. And as we all know, Lee DeForest was proven horribly, horribly wrong, because in 1969, just 12 years after he made his bold prediction, we sent men to the moon, they landed, and they returned. To those who were lucky enough to witness it, the moon landing represented a complete redefinition of what is and isn't possible. I mean, there were people walking on a different world just 12 years after the best and brightest of us thought it was more akin to a science fiction novel than in the pages of reality. And in this tumultuous times, we naturally turn towards the future, or wonders it would behold. The cars of tomorrow, the homes of tomorrow, the food of tomorrow. The sudden burst of progress that the moon landing brought galvanized our nation to dream of the future. But as we stand here in 2013, it appears though our tomorrow never came. Our cars cannot fly, our houses are largely the same, and any realistic hopes of manned missions to Mars are at least decades away. So what happened? Well, each day, each month, each year, each decade, inching closer to that mystic tomorrow, we stopped dreaming, we stopped progressing, and we forgot that in order to fight for the tomorrow that we want for ourselves, we have to fight for it today. Here in the United States, the most powerful agency on the dreams of a nation is currently underfunded to do what it needs to do, and that is to make tomorrow happen. Of course, I'm speaking of the agency that first brought us to space, or first brought us to the moon and began mankind's exploration into space, NASA. Right now, NASA's education and planetary science funding is being decimated. We are not going back to the moon, and we've ironically had to rely on the Russians for transport to and from the International Space Station. But as our politicians are continuously slashing NASA's budget, treating it as little more than an expensive science project, they hide underneath the familiar cover that we simply can't afford it. If I accomplish nothing else today, I want to leave here knowing that you know the falsity of that statement. Because right now, NASA's budget only represents 0.4% of our country's discretionary spending. 0.4%. That's 4/10 of a single penny. 4/10 of a single penny of every tax dollar. So when they say that we cannot afford NASA, they're wrong. We can afford NASA. In fact, we cannot afford to not fund NASA. We need NASA. As we sit here today wondering when the technologies of tomorrow are coming, we need NASA. As we sit here today seeing our country fall behind in nearly every scientific field, we need NASA. And as we sit here today grappling with the fundamental questions of our existence and place in the universe, we need NASA. We need NASA because it touches our lives in more ways than many would imagine. I mean, sure, there are the very tangible benefits to NASA. LED lights that we all so lovingly use, infrared ear thermometers that are now commonplace in hospitals, the groovings in concrete that reduce slipping, chemical detecting systems, firefighting equipment, enriched baby food, portable cordless vacuums, freeze drying, Tempur-Pedic foam, all things that are a direct result of NASA. So by not funding NASA now, we are specifically depriving ourselves of the future technologies that would shape our economy and our future society. But even more so than that, I think that the intangible benefits of NASA are even more important. For when Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon on July 20th, 1969, we accomplished something that had never been done in the history of our species. And that exhilaration, that rush of excitement, bounced off walls, propagating through society and came back at us. It inspired us to solve other problems that also hadn't been solved yet. It increased the general sense of optimism in our society, but more importantly, it inspired and cultivated the next generation of scientists that make tomorrow happen. The next generation of scientists, engineers, mathematicians, physicists, geologists, all these people that make tomorrow happen. But after that initial surge forward in 1969, and especially with the end of the Cold War, we took our foot off the gas pedal and cried mission accomplished, letting both man's foray into space and NASA fall on our list of priorities. And I think this is a grievous mistake, one that we might not even recognize right now, and one that could potentially hold our country and our species from reaching our alluring tomorrow. All hope is not lost, however. As the French aviator Antoine Chouperet once said, "If you wish to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea." So if we truly wish for this alluring tomorrow, if we truly wish for this progress, then our course of action is set, and you can help. We must teach those around us that NASA and tomorrow is worth fighting for. We must teach them to yearn for progress, that the currently unattainable is not the impossible. And this task, as daunting as it might seem, doesn't have to be shouldered by us alone. There are plenty of organizations such as Penny for NASA, whose sole mission it is to increase NASA's funding to 1% of the federal budget. That's 1 penny out of every tax dollar, and that 1 penny would be enough to go back to the moon, to search for asteroids and explore them, and to go to Mars soon with people. So 1 penny, it's all we're asking for, and the more of us that ask, the higher chance we have that someone will listen. I cannot promise you that we will be successful in this mission, but I do know that if we don't even try, we are guaranteed to fail. And I believe that this is an issue that is simply too important for us not to try. So please, join me in Penny for NASA and go to pennyfornasa.org to help sign the petition and help increase NASA's funding. Tell your friends, write your congressman, tell anyone who will listen that tomorrow NASA in the future is worth fighting for. But most importantly, educate yourself. Educate yourself about NASA's goals, what its missions are, and how they're being held back. If we can do this, if we can come together for the good of mankind, I promise you that we can bring ourselves both figuratively and literally to the stars.